Hello everybody, welcome back to another Borderlands 2 video. Today we are going to be doing my 1 through OP10 guide for leveling and gear, and this one is going to be for Axton. So today we'll start with level 1 through 30, uh, a good leveling strategy to get you through normal Vault Hunter mode, and then we'll talk about some of the gear and farming tactics and stuff like that that will also help you out. So yeah, let's go ahead and just jump into the skill build. Okay, so when we hit level 5, we're obviously going to take our action skill, the Saber Turret. And just a few quick things to note about Axton when you're playing him, if this is your first time. The Saber Turret is pretty solid. So early on in the game, it's not that strong. It does some decent damage, but one of the major themes of the Saber Turret for the entire time you play Axton is the aggro control that the turret provides. It takes a significant amount of pressure off of you. Enemies are going to focus the turret, and that allows you to kind of maneuver around and just kill everything while the turret soaks up damage for you and also get some kills in the process. So think of the turret as like almost like a decoy that you're throwing out for the enemies to focus on. You don't have to worry so much about like putting it in the optimal spot to get damage all the time. A great way to use the turret is honestly sometimes to just throw it in the middle of a bunch of enemies, and that's going to group them up for you, and you can throw a bunch of grenades, shoot them with rocket launcher, whatever. So think of the turret as not only for like good for damage, but as a serious tool for crowd control and aggro prevention. It's really, really good for that, and I don't know that people always use it that way, but I think you should. So yeah, Saber Turret, really solid action skill, underrated action skill, and it just gets stronger throughout the game, which is pretty nice. So that's going to be pretty helpful. One thing I will say, I don't have my community patch active right now. This is just the base game. Um, the turret scaling is a little weird for the base game. The damage does start to fall off in the like super late game, especially when we're talking like the OP levels. The scaling is not correct. I believe it is. Um, I believe it does work for console. I'm not entirely sure on that, but I know for like Death Trap, for example, he scales properly into the late game on console, and I think that also applies for Axton. But for some reason on PC, like the turret and Death Trap don't scale into the late game. Like their damage doesn't really scale up. They end up being like pretty awful for damage. So that's where the aggro control comes in again. They're still an amazing tool for crowd control. That always stays the same. But if you're just playing this on PC, vanilla game, the turret is not going to scale that well. So it's kind of unfortunate. Whereas if you are using the unofficial community patch like I do in a lot of my videos, it does scale properly and the damage is actually pretty respectable. So just something to keep in mind. All right, that's enough blabbering about that. Let's go ahead and get into the skills. So from levels 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10, so 6 through 10, we're going to go ahead and start on the green tree. This is generally my favorite tree for Axton just because it provides you with so many different things that help you. And honestly, you can take either one of these first. We're going to max both of them anyway, so really whichever you prefer. You can get the Sentry buff to give you extra turret duration and shots fired per burst, or you can get the reload speed. Reload speed is going to give you more DPS, which I find to be a little bit more useful in the early game because the turret is just not that strong early on. Um, so I think I would prefer to get the DPS for myself and grab the reload speed. And it's a pretty substantial amount, 40%. Um, that is really going to ramp up your DPS. Like it's actually quite noticeable and quite helpful, especially in conjunction with some of Axton's later skills. But this is a good start. So now, from 11, 12, 13, 14 to 15, so 11 through 15, we'll go ahead and take Sentry. I mean, it's a pretty self-explanatory skill. We get more turret duration, which is nice, more aggro control, but also +5 shots fired per burst, so more damage from the turret. Um, Damage from the turret's pretty respectable in the first playthrough. It'll kill some enemies for you, and again, more aggro control, so we like that. Okay, So for our next 5 points, again, I think this is kind of a toss-up. I think it depends how you feel in the playthrough. Like, if you feel like you're struggling a bit with survivability, I would go ahead and max out Willing. It's a really nice shield skill that's going to increase your survivability a lot. Or you can even take a little bit of Able if you want, but I don't think that's super necessary in the early game. Um, so I would recommend Willing if you're struggling with survivability a little bit. Go ahead and max that. But if you don't feel like you're struggling that much with survivability, I would do level 16. Go ahead and take Scorched Earth. This is actually a massive DPS buff to the turrets in the early game. They will hit really hard. So this is really nice. And then I guess it would be 17 to 21. So yeah, that's correct. We would max Onslaught. Huge damage buff. So every time we kill an enemy, we get 30% gun damage and 60% movement speed. So we can kind of just zoom around the map and slaughter everything with our really high gun damage bonus. So Onslaught's an amazing skill. You definitely want to max it regardless of which one you get first, but I typically feel comfortable enough to get Onslaught before Willing. This early in the game, you shouldn't be struggling that much with survivability, but you may be, so again, Willing is a great option if you are, and we're going to grab it next anyway, because we do want some survivability. So 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, we will allocate our points to Willing. 75% recharge rate and a minus 60% shield recharge delay. Axton is like the master of shield skills. He has so many skills that buff the shit out of his recharge rate and delay. And this is just another one that is just so great. This is a really good survivability skill. You definitely don't want to count it out. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. And then for our last 4 points, we have a lot of options here. Um, I don't want crisis management. Could be a pretty good skill for like a one life if you're doing that, but otherwise the skill is pretty mediocre. Why would I want a skill that buffs damage and or gun damage and melee damage while my shields are depleted when all of my skills are buffing my shield recharge rate? Just kind of a weird skill in his kit. Not a huge fan. Um, so for that reason, we're not going to take that. Able, I think, is a little redundant. We shouldn't need that much survivability this early in the game, but you might. It just depends how you play, like what your play style is. You may want to just go ahead and take Able. But I think Grenadier makes the most sense here. We can just spam more grenades, and Axton is really strong with grenades, as we'll see later. Um, if we want to go ahead and progress this tree. Another option is we could divert and start going down one of these trees. Again, if we want extra survivability, I think Preparation is a superior choice to Able. So if you're struggling with survivability, you can take this really at any time. It's a great skill. So we could go points here, but I do really like Double Up. Slag turrets are going to be really helpful for our next playthrough on True Vault Hunter mode. So I think we may as well go ahead and get as close to maxing out this tree as possible. And we will grab... You know what? We'll actually grab Able, because I think it's a little bit more like noob friendly. I think it's going to be more helpful to newer players to keep you guys alive rather than more grenades. But if you're a more experienced player or you don't feel like survivability is an issue, just grab Grenadier. But in this case, we'll actually grab Able. So Able, every time we damage an enemy, we get to regenerate 1.6% of our max health, and it lasts for 3 seconds. So, I mean, this is basically permanent health regen. And it's honestly pretty nice. It's really good sustain. On top of your shield skills, you should be having no issues with survivability at this point. And again, if you don't feel like you're having that many issues with survivability, just scrap Able, put those points into Grenadier, and chuck more grenades. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty good strategy. So that'll finish us up for the first playthrough. This should help get you through pretty smoothly. It's a good mix of damage, action skill buffs, survivability, which is basically exactly what we want. And it unlocks our capstone for the next playthrough, which is going to give us the slag turret, so we don't have to worry about slag as much on our own, which is pretty fantastic. So yeah, guys, this is the build for level 1 through 30. And I will go ahead and cut out for now, and when I come back, we'll talk about some of the gear options for your first playthrough and what synergizes well with Axton. So I will see you guys in a second. All right, so we are back with the second half of the video, and we're going to be talking about some gear options for Axton on your first playthrough that will generally just help if you decide to farm them. We'll talk about general items as well, but we'll also focus on some uniques that are really good on Axton. But I suppose we'll go ahead and start with non-unique weapons, so just general weapons in the game that you'll find that are good on Axton. So one thing that I would look out for, Axton has like this weird reputation as like the assault rifle guy. I don't really know why. Like he does have some comms and that buff assault rifles, and he is good with assault rifles, but like I don't know why he's typecast like specifically as the assault rifle guy. Um, yeah, I don't know. Kind of weird to me. He is good with them, and a couple to look out for. Flat off assault rifles are generally pretty good. Elemental ones are solid. Um, Torg are also pretty good assault rifles for him, and just Torg in general. He has a lot of explosive damage buffs, and the reload speed really helps with Torg. One of their biggest weaknesses is typically reload speed. So Torg is generally really good. Explosive damage. He has high fire rate, high gun damage, high reload speed. Torg is pretty awesome on Axton. Pretty just about any Torg weapon. Again, flat off ARs are pretty solid. TDR weapons are also generally great. I would say in particular TDR SMGs are nice. Again, this comes down to the fact that he has crazy high reload speed, great grenade damage, um, and for those of you that don't know, when you if you shoot a TDR weapon and you reload, you throw it, and that damage is actually grenade damage when you throw it. Axton buffs grenade damage. And he has really freaking high reload speed, so you can chuck TDR like crazy fast that also does a bunch of damage. So TDR in general is fantastic for chucking on him. I would not chuck TDR shotguns, they're just not very good. They just don't do a lot of damage and they're slower to throw than the SMG or like a pistol, for example. Um, so wouldn't recommend throwing those. I would recommend chuck TDR SMGs. Those do a lot of damage typically. They're fast. Um, and even sometimes can be pretty good to just shoot. So yeah, TDR SMGs in particular are really good to chuck. We talked about Torg, but more specifically, I would focus on like Torg ARs, like the Spitter variant is pretty good, and also the Torg shotguns, especially the Ravager variant, is absolutely incredible on Axton. Um, in normal Vault Hunter mode, you're not going to have like all the explosive buffs that Axton would normally have, so you don't have to like hard focus on this, but even the reload speed and the damage buffs from Onslaught that we'll have will make like Torque shotguns and ARs really strong. And they'll only get stronger as we max more skills with Axton, so definitely keep that in mind and be on the lookout for those for sure. Some other weapons that we can look out for just generally Anarchist pistols. I've talked about this on a few videos, I feel like, but they're just typically they are purple variant Vladoff pistols. They shoot really fast. They're pretty accurate, pretty good damage, and they can come in any element. So they're versatile. They have good damage. Typically pretty easy to find. So yeah, I would highly recommend those. Very solid on Axton because he can take their fire rate to like the next level, has nice gun damage to buff. The movement speed allows you to run around with them really easily, and you have good reload speed. So yeah, nice weapon. Some snipers to think about on your playthrough. I typically steer towards Vladov and Malawan if I use snipers on accident. I definitely do. Vladov and Malawan typically synergize the best with his kit. Vladov just has really high fire rate, which again kind of just makes sense with his kit because he is this high fire rate, high reload, high damage kind of guy. So anything where you can get even more out of that is pretty nice. And Malawan, really, I just like Malawan snipers. I think they're good on just about any character. They're high damage, high elemental damage and effect. Pretty easy to aim with. They're pretty sleek. Like they just feel good to use, and they're pretty generally good snipers. And again, the buffs that Axton has will really help take them up a notch. And then a classic on Axton, rocket launchers. Again, you may not feel this as much on your first playthrough because, again, we don't have a lot of the launcher and explosive damage buffs and stuff yet. But it's just a general thing we want to be keeping an eye out for because he is really good with them. And to harp on it yet again, the reload speed's going to help a lot with launchers, and so is the gun damage and the movement speed from Onslaught, so it's still good. Uh, Specific ones to look out for, I would say E-Tech ones like the PBFG and the Topnia are top tier rocket launchers, incredibly strong. A little bit harder to get than your typical launchers though. So for other options, you could look for bandit launchers. Bandit launchers in general are good because they have insane mag size and pretty high fire rate and damage. And again, your reload speed will help with the slower reload speed that they typically tend to have. And of course, again, explosive buffs. And then I also like Vladoff launchers. They're a little weaker, but they have high ammo efficiency. So those are some of the like non-uniques to take a look out for. And then lastly, I also like E-Tech SMGs, so plasma casters. Plasma casters are really good on really every character, but they're actually particularly good on Axton because plasma casters are actually buffed by grenade damage. They have grenade splash damage. So I don't know if everyone knows that, but it actually makes them really strong on Axton, especially when we start getting down the middle tree and taking these grenade damage skills. Plasma casters will really shine. But again, in general, they're just strong weapons, and you'll be able to pump up their damage with Onslaught and Ready. So those are all pretty good options. And now we can kind of just talk about some of the unique weapons that if you decide to farm them or if you happen to get them, they're really, really solid on Axton. So I did the level 30 boosted character to start this, and it actually gave me the Hail. And I think it does this every time. And the Hail is absolutely fantastic on Axton. And I've talked about this. I actually have a video on the Hail if you want to learn more about it. This gun is kick-ass, but it's hard to use. It has a weird firing pattern. It fires like in a hail, like an arc, rains down on you. So you have to aim low, like towards the feet most of the time. But if you can get used to this thing, it just shits out damage. It can come in all elements. High fire rate. It's also a moxie weapon, so it heals you when you use it. So it just has so much going for it. And to top it all off, it does grenade damage, grenade splash damage as well. So like this weapon can just absolutely shred enemies with Axton. It is incredible on Axton, especially later on when we get the grenade damage buffs. But it's still really good with Onslaught and Ready. And this is obtained from the Circle of Slaughter in the fridge. You just have to complete all 5 rounds. Okay, moving on, and this is in no particular order. We're just going to kind of go through these weapons and talk about them, and yeah. So we'll just start from the top. So the Nukem, this is a pretty good rocket launcher. It's insane, like insanely slow fire rate, but really high damage. Reload speed is also disgusting, but Axton can help with reload speed and fire rate, so that's a plus. But basically, you can get this from the Black Queen out in the dust. It does really, really good damage, but it's just slow. I mean, it's like a nuke. You know, you shoot it once and you gotta wait. So it's a very solid fight for your life weapon, and Axton can get more out of it than most characters. Next, we have the Bada Boom, which you get from King Mong, which is towards the end of the game, out in Iridium Blight. And the Bada Boom is probably my favorite rocket launcher, period. And I think it's maybe it's you can't say it's the best in the game because the Norfleet exists. The Norfleet is just really cheesy. It's obviously really good, but much harder to get than the Bada Boom. The Bada Boom though is very easily obtainable, comes in all elements, and just does massive damage. The mag size is absolutely huge. It shoots multiple projectiles that just does so much damage. It's an amazing fight for your life weapon. You can just run around with this thing when you start getting more of Axton's explosive damage buffs. And again, he helps with the reload speed and the fire rate, which are weaknesses of the weapon. So yeah, this thing just kicks ass on Axton. It's super good. Next, another weapon that pretty much everybody knows about, the Deepa, the Herald. Really, easy to get and get it very early in the game from Savage Lee out in Three Horns Divide. It's pretty simple. It's just an explosive damage pistol that pumps out damage, especially if you get the double penetrating prefix. It'll shoot double the projectiles. This guy just pumps out damage. Most people are familiar with it. Axton, yet again, takes this up a notch with his explosive and grenade damage buffs and his reload speed, fire rate, all of that fun stuff. Um, it just does so much damage with him. Next, we have Hornet. The Hornet is literally farmed from the first boss in the game, which is, oh my god, I'm actually forgetting his name. I've played this game so many times, I can't believe. Knuckle Dragger. There we go. Okay, Knuckle Dragger. He drops the Hornet. I wouldn't recommend farming this because it's a corrosive weapon, and you won't find corrosive enemies till much later, so it'll be kind of useless on your first playthrough, but it's still a good weapon. If you get it, it'll still pump out good damage on flesh enemies. And this is a weapon that is buffed by grenade damage, so yet again, Axton can get more out of this. We have another pistol making an appearance, the Thunderball Fist. So this is from Captain Flint, so another early game pistol. And the reason this is good because, yet again, it is buffed by grenade damage. It has grenade splash damage. So when we start getting those grenade damage skills, the Thunderball Fist does a lot of damage. And Axton helps a lot with this thing's poor fire rate. It's one of its biggest weaknesses. And some of his skills as we move on throughout the tree will really help elevate the damage. But this is just a solid gun to use, does pretty good damage, and it's fun. Moving on, we have the Baby Maker. This might be my favorite gun to use on Axton, and easily one of his best. This gun is awesome, and this is what I was talking about with the TDRs. This is like the perfect chucking weapon for Axton. So basically you'll want to shoot one time and then chuck it with a full mag. Hopefully you get the refill Baby Maker because it's faster reload speed. So when you throw the Baby Maker, it spawns a second like SMG, like hence the name, the Baby Maker. So you're basically throwing two of these every time you throw it. It does crazy damage. You don't want to like just run around and throw this all the time. It's mostly used for your tougher enemies, but it is really high DPS on Axton. All right, next we have the Hammer Buster, which you get from McNally and the dust from the Bane mission. Definitely don't use the Bane though. Good lord, that gun. The Hammer Buster though is just like a standard Jacobs AR. I believe there are some hidden properties on this weapon that I'm totally forgetting, but it's pretty straightforward. You just shoot as fast as you can pull the trigger. It does really solid DPS, and again, your high fire rate, damage, and reload speed skills help elevate this weapon to a new level. Solid gun, pretty easy to get. Another AR on the list, we have the Kerblaster. You get this from Midgemong, from the, I forget the name of the quest, like Shielded Favor. It's one of the first quests in the game. If you just take a few of the first quests in the game, it'll take you to a side area, and you can kill Midgemong repeatedly to try to get the Kerblaster. Again, I don't think it's really worth farming in the early game, but if you get it, definitely use it. It shoots an explosive round that then drops a child grenade, which is buffed by grenade damage. So really nice synergy with Axton skills, the fire rate, the damage, the reload speed. Yet again, we're gonna keep harping on that. I mean, it just synergizes really well with any gun, but it's especially nice on these guns with lower fire rate, like the Kerblaster. Like having higher fire rate and fixing the bad reload speed and things like that is very helpful to really amp up this gun's damage. Next, we have the Hellfire, which is from Scorch in the excuse me, the Cult Following quest line. You can farm Scorch after you've completed it. Hellfire is just a really solid elemental SMG that always comes in fire. The main benefit of the Hellfire is that it, yet again, does grenade damage. So, another solid choice. The Slaga. This is one that I would highly recommend getting, even on your first playthrough, like actually farming this. It's just going to be super useful for the entire game, and you actually won't really have to farm it again for the rest of the game if you don't want to.
and you really would like to get the bullets go fasterified. I don't even know how you pronounce that. Um, Prefix because it'll make it the projectiles much faster. And really, this is just your slag weapon. So slag, when you apply slag to an enemy, they take increased damage from all sources. So you slag them with the slagga, and you switch and blow them up with other weapons. And the nice thing about the slagga is you're never going to use it to do damage. You're just using it to slag, so it doesn't matter if it's a low-level slagga. This is from the Clan Wars quest line. I believe you kill the Hodunks to farm the slagga, and that is what I would recommend doing. But if you don't finish the quest and you get to the showdown portion of the quest, you can just kill both sides, I believe, and then just keep save quitting and farming both sides to get the Slagga and the Maggie, which is another good weapon actually. So I would recommend doing that. There's probably some farming videos on that if you're interested, but both are good weapons. Slagga, definitely keep an eye on this one. We will be using this. Not super important in the first playthrough. Again, don't have to. But if you want to get it out of the way, this will last you the entire game and is incredibly useful in the later playthroughs. Next up, this is what I was talking about, just a TDR plasma caster. Really high damage on its own. You can also chuck it to do massive damage, buffed by grenade damage. Awesome weapon on Axton. Pretty much all you need to know. Next up, we have the Ravager, which I mentioned before, so not too much detail here. Good damage, buffed by a lot of your skills. Spitter, this is just one of those standard Torg ARs that I talked about. Just solid synergy with your skill tree. It's got the explosive damage. It's got good fire rate that you can buff up. You can help with the reload speed problems, so on and so forth. And this is basically the Hammer Buster. I mean, the Hammer Buster is just a better version of the Gatling guns. But if you can't get the Hammer Buster, these Gatling guns are a very solid alternative, and you might have an easier time finding them. They do good damage, can be used well from range, synergize well with Axton's kit. Next up, we have the good touch and the bad touch. These are just really easy to get, so I always kind of highlight them, especially in the first playthrough. They're corrosive and fire element. Easy to acquire, will help deal with certain, flesh and armored enemies. They are moxie weapons, so they will heal you when you use them. And I believe they are buffed by grenade damage as well, which is yet another bonus. These are just solid weapons, not great late game, but pretty good in your first and second playthrough. Next up, Bone Shredder, you get from Bonehead towards the end of the game. This is not a priority weapon, but I do think it is pretty solid on just about any character. It just has a lot of damage, high fire rate, high mag size. It's just fun to use and puts out good DPS. Next up, we have the Lady Fist, which you acquire from the Uncle Teddy mission out in the arid Badlands or Boneyard. I always forget the name. I think it's Boneyard actually. But you do that quest and you give the blueprint to Teddy's daughter and you get the Lady Fist. It's just as you can see off the weapon card, it's 800% critical hit damage. Really useful for the constructors that you'll be fighting in the late game. It'll just melt them. And it's also pretty good against the warrior and his crit spots at the end of the game. So yeah, Lady Fist is a solid option and super easy to acquire, so I would definitely recommend it. Next up, we have the Teapot. This is pretty early in the game. It's from Tiny Tina. You are cordially invited, the Tea Party quest. And it's actually a really nice timing when you get this weapon because you fight a bunch of loaders right after you get it. So yeah, I would recommend this one. It's really high fire rate. It's similar to the Hornet actually in functionality. It has grenade damage buffs as well. It is also locked to the corrosive element like the Hornet, but this thing's just pretty straightforward. High fire rate, pretty high damage, good reload speed, solid elemental effect with grenade damage. It's just a solid weapon and it'll help you with loaders in the early game, so I'd recommend it. Next up, we have Gwen's Head. This can spawn in 5 randomized locations in the dust. I would just look up a farming video for this because I'm actually not even all that familiar with all 5 locations. But it is a pretty good weapon. And again, if you can learn those spots, which I think are really easy, I just like usually skip over this weapon because I'm lazy. This weapon's actually good. High damage, high accuracy, high fire rate. It can be any element. Um, it's a solid weapon all around. Easy to acquire and will help you in the early to mid game. So yeah, I would recommend that one. And then one of my favorites is the Lascaux, which you get at the very beginning of the game in Frostburn Canyon. I've talked about it before, but basically you will follow along these like trail signs, and eventually it's going to veer off. When you're following them, it's going to veer off into a right path and a left path, and you'll follow it left until you find a puddle, and the Lascaux will be there, and you can refarm that. You can leave the area, come back, it'll be there again, so you can just save, quit, farm the Lascaux repeatedly, which is pretty nice. And I think a nifty little trick with the Lascaux is if you're at the beginning of Frostburn Canyon, you can exit the area, come back in like 20 times, and I think it will respawn the like Lascaux like 20 times. So you'll get to pick from them. I believe that's true, but I may be mistaken. But this is just a high damage SMG with extra pellets. It's just solid. Not much to be said. And the fact that you get it so early is why it's nice, because it'll help you in the early game. And then the last weapon I decided to showcase was the Roaster, which is from the Note for Self Person quest in the fridge. You have to find the Goliath, and then I think you need to kill him before he enrages, so keep that in mind. I think that's the case. But this is just a solid bandit rocket launcher, nothing really special about it. We talked about how bandit rocket launchers are good. This is just a better version of your standard bandit launcher, I believe. I may be mistaken. I should have actually brought a non-unique, because I can't actually remember if the bandit is better than most non-unique. If the roaster, I mean, is better than non-unique bandit launchers. I think it's close, but the main thing here is that it's a guaranteed one. So if you can't find one, at least you have this. So yeah, pretty solid. Next up, we have some relics. I wouldn't really go out of your way to get any of these, but you'll probably come across them as you play the game. So a proficiency relic, it's always a solid choice. Having more uptime on your turret is a great option. Heck yeah, why not? If you come across some allegiance relics, which is probably less likely, but if you do, look out for Torg, TDR, and maybe even Jacobs, I would consider. I mean, really any can be pretty good on Axton. And you can rock an allegiance relic, throw on, a few Torg weapons if you get a Torg one, and it'll be a pretty nice buff to your damage. So yeah, keep an eye out for those. Explosive damage relic is nice. You're going to be using a lot of explosive weapons on Axton. Um, just a solid choice for him. Moxie's Endowment, I talked about this on the Maya video. I forgot that if you're not on UCP, this actually doesn't give that much of an XP boost. So it's not like a must-have option, but it is easy to acquire. And it does give you a little bit of a boost. So if you're like grinding really hard and you want extra XP, it's an option. Not great, not bad, but it's there and it's easy to get. Next up, we have some comms to go over. Just to be on the lookout for in the early game, I like the gunner comms. They give team fire rate, so especially if you're playing co-op, this is really nice because it's going to give your team some fire rate, yourself some fire rate, and it actually buffs your turret fire rate, which is kind of funny, but it does in fact buff the turret fire rate. And it gives some decent skills. Overload, Steady, and Metal Storm are all good skills, and you could always, again, be flexible with your builds. You don't have to follow mine to the T. If you get a comm that you like, respec and take some of the skills that it buffs. Metal Storm's an awesome skill. You can definitely build around that. Next up, a Grenadier comm. These are awesome. And if you can get a Grenadier comm, it's all the more reason to use some of those guns I talked about that are buffed by grenade damage. Like, this will really help. So getting extra grenade damage, awesome, fantastic. And we get steady impact and Grenadier. Like, yeah, those are good skills. And again, if you get a comm that buffs skills that you're not using, feel free to respec and take them, because you may as well get something out of it. And also keep in mind that the blue version of these comms can sometimes be better. Like, for example, with the Grenadier, I would prefer to have like a +6 to the Grenadier skill and a +5 to steady, and just not have impact. So the blue ones only give you 2 skills, but they give you more. Like a level 31 though, it'd probably be like +4 Grenadier maybe, and like +3 to steady, something like that. So keep an eye out for those as well. And then the expert veteran comm, I like these as well. I would definitely get the blue one for this actually. The veteran variants. Last Ditch is not a worthwhile skill. So you can get the blue one and get more into steady and pressure, or I believe there's some other variants that buff different skills. So just take the ones that you like. But reload speed and magazine size is awesome. That's just a huge, huge DPS buff. And yet again, that's a big buff to TD or chucking. So keep that in mind. And then lastly, the impact rifleman. So this is if you do want to fall into the action assault rifle typecast, stereotype, whatever you want to call it. It's definitely not bad. You can absolutely play this way, especially if you want to rock the hail, the hammer busters, some of the weapons we talked about here. That's going to be pretty good for you. And I would look for one that has a higher buff to the onslaught skill. That's going to really pump up your damage. And then lastly, just a few grenades. Again, none of these are a must farm, but the Stormfront is a solid one. It is acquired from the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles side mission. I forget the name, but it's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle one where you deliver a pizza, and you all four of the turtles can drop the Stormfront. So not that bad to farm. It just does a shitload of damage. You buff grenade damage yet again, and especially if you're going to get a Grenadier comm and level up the Grenadier skill, spamming these is just going to kill everything. Similar logic here with the bonus package. This is actually obtained really early from Boom Boom, like literally the first boss. I normally don't advocate for farming on the first playthrough, and again, you don't have to, but this grenade, even like a low level one, will carry you for so long. Like if you're struggling, get this grenade from Boom Boom. I mean, it's just stupid strong on Axton, especially when you start getting those skills. You can just spam this down a hallway and it will slaughter everything. So yeah, I really like this one in the first playthrough, especially. Sort of a similar theme here with the fastball. This thing does amazing damage. You have skills to buff grenade damage and get more grenades, so the fastball is a great choice. It's farmed from Bull in the In Memoriam quest, I believe is what it's called. You can farm Bull repeatedly and he can drop the fastball. And it's, I mean, you literally throw it like a baseball, so you have to hit them directly on. But it does a lot of damage when you direct hit, like a lot. So absolutely worth. It's super fun to use, super high damage. I would recommend it. And then lastly, if you have the DLC and you start with the Contraband Skyrocket, this is a really high damage grenade that scales with you. It's really good on the first playthrough. Definitely don't mind using that. And then as for shields, just take anything with high capacity, high recharge, low delay. I would specifically look for stuff that has higher recharge rate and lower delay on Axton because he is more of a shield buffer. Um, so you have high shield recharge rate and you cut down the delay, and you'll have more skills that do that later. So if you find a shield that has a high recharge rate and low delay and you're buffing it even more, like your shield uptime is basically going to be 100%. It's going to be really good. So look out for stuff like that. TDOR tends to have shields like that. Malawan tends to have some pretty cool and good shields, but honestly, it just varies. Hyperion is probably a pretty good fit as well. But yeah, not a huge deal. Just use the best available. And yeah, I think I've babbled on long enough. That is some of the gear you can use for Axton to look out for on your first playthrough. That should really just make the game easier for you, honestly. And most of this gear is going to apply in the later playthroughs as well, but we'll talk about that. But yeah, guys, there's the gear. Here's the build one more time. And I will see you on part 2.